Hey nerds, set phasers to stun. Now, I've only just realized that phasers are basically controlled and directed nuclear weapons. I have spent my whole life watching Star Trek and assuming that phasers were lasers. Then someone was like, nah, Abby, mate, come on, they're particle beams. But then someone else was like, hey, no, actually they're a combination. And then I read the TNG manual. Rapid nadion effect. What? Well, we're going to try and figure this out. So, the TNG manual says that phasers are directed energy weapons with a complicated energy release process and were developed to replace pure EM devices such as the laser as well as particle beam accelerators. Now, the technical manual, because yes, I own both of these things. These show hand phaser type 1 as having a 1.02 MeV photon emitter, and then phaser type 2 has a photon accelerator. I can't see a power rating for it. So, the manual says that they work by converting stored energy into lightly controllable beams through a modified version of the rapid nadion effect. So what in the physics is going on here? Well, is it a laser or a particle beam, or is it both? And what the hell are nadions? All right, look, nadions are fictional subatomic particles that have special properties related to high-speed interactions with atomic nuclei. Apparently, they can liberate and transfer strong nuclear forces within a class of superconducting crystal through a pulsed protonic charge. The effect is that the emitter converts pumped energy into a tuned phaser discharge. Let's do some real physics. Okay, the protonic charge part, it's just Trek talk. Same as nadions. Nadions are not real particles, they're Trek particles. But we can make an educated guess about what they're trying to imply is the process and what's happening here. Because it sounds like they are actually modeling it on how a laser works. So we should start there. Now, a laser works by pumping energy into a material which is called a gain medium. Now, this could be a gas, it could be a crystal, it could be a semiconductor. The energy excites electrons in the atoms of the medium up to higher energy states. And when those electrons drop back down, they release photons, so packets of light. And if the conditions are set up properly, those photons will simulate the release of more photons with the same energy, traveling in the same direction and in phase with each other. And then that's what makes laser light. So different to the light that we get from a torch. It's not just a beam of light, it's a very organized, very tightly controlled beam of photons. So it sounds like they're implying a similar type of process. The nadions go into a superconducting crystal, and then using a pulsed protonic charge, they break the strong nuclear forces, which is released as the, and then stuff is released as the phaser discharge, I think. Now, the strong nuclear force is what is holding protons and neutrons together inside a nucleus. So the fictional process here is overcoming this nuclear binding energy. So no matter how you put it here, phasers are operating in the regime of nuclear scale interactions, which are orders of magnitude more energetic than anything involved in conventional lasers. Now, there are only a few known mechanisms that can break apart nuclei in a controlled way. One of them is a high energy particle bombardment. This is where beams of protons or other ions are fired at a target, knocking nucleons out of atomic nuclei. Now, this is done in a lot of particle accelerators. Another method is high energy photon interactions, specifically gamma rays in the MeV range, which can then induce something called photodisintegration. This is effectively breaking nuclei apart using radiation alone. And then a third possibility is that the system triggers a nuclear reaction within a material similar to spallation sources, which are used in physics research, where high energy input produces cascades of secondary particles and radiation. So, if we treat this fictional concept of the rapid nadion effect as an analogy to a laser, then the superconducting crystal is acting in a very similar way to the laser's gain medium. But instead of managing electronic transitions, it's acting as a controlled environment for nuclear interactions. So then they cause these interactions using what they call a pulsed protonic charge, which is not real in physics, but pulsed charged particle injection is. Now, in our normal real world, this would mean bursts of high energy protons, or something behaving similarly to that, being used to trigger reactions inside the medium. Pulsing is important because it allows you to control the timing, the intensity, and the energy deposition. So it's implying that this pulsed charge initiates these controlled nuclear reactions inside the superconducting crystal, and then the whole effect is the rapid nadion effect. So once you start breaking apart nuclei, the outputs are really well understood in physics. And we don't get anything like a clean single type beam. What you get is a mix of particles and radiation. This would include protons, neutrons, maybe even heavier nuclear fragments, as well as high energy photons such as gamma rays and X-rays. So then these particles all carry significant kinetic energy and they are highly ionizing. Very, very dangerous, very, very energetic. So a phaser must be expelling the products of the nuclear reactions as the beam itself. And then that means that what leaves the emitter is a directed burst of high energy radiation and particles. So it is both a particle and a laser beam, but it's really a controlled nuclear discharge. So a laser controls electron energy levels, a phaser would be controlling nuclear energy. Now the manual says that the power level determines pulse frequency and relative proportion of protonic charge in the final emitter stage. So this is basically what they're saying is deciding how much the crystal is pumped, which gives the percentage of the nuclear disruption force, creating a threshold for how many reactions you get. If it's below the threshold, you stun. If it's above the threshold, no stun. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing. It's science fiction, so come on. But the manual says that phasers may be fired one way through the ship's own shields due to EM polarization. Now, polarization is a general property of electromagnetic waves, which suggests that some component of the beam is electromagnetic radiation, which we've already talked about, but that this can be tuned or aligned in a specific way, which allows it to interact differently with the ship's shields. And now the manual also says that stun results in simple electromagnetic effects on the body, whereas higher power leads to nuclear disruption force, which then kind of sounds like it's suggesting that it's moving between different physical regimes, that at low energy, it's just like electromagnetic interactions with the body. Now, we don't know what kind, as there aren't any in reality, like in real physics, that would just like stun a person. And then it's saying that at higher energies is when you get the ionizing radiation and the nuclear interactions that lead to disintegration. In a purely sci-fi way, obviously. So it seems like the phaser would have to switch or like shift modes depending on the setting. Now, one other point here to mention is about collimation. See, the beauty of a laser is that all the photons have the same energy value and they move in the same direction, roughly. Normal light will tend to diffuse out, so it spreads more and more the further away it gets. Lasers do this too, but a really good laser will be collimated, meaning that it will travel for as long as your setup can manage without diverging that much. So you have a really tightly focused beam, so all your energy is still contained within that region. The more it spreads out, the less energy there is in the same space, so it's not as effective. And the same thing will happen with a particle beam as well. Now, there are ways to collimate laser light and there are ways to collimate particle beams. I don't think there's any reasonable way to suggest a way to collimate a beam made up of nuclear reaction products, which is like a mixture of photons and particles. But I suppose you could think about maybe using some sort of electromagnetic fields in some way, the same way maybe you would try to use a magnetic bottle to direct fusion products out. We talked about this in the episode or the monthly deep dive that we did all about nuclear fusion in The Expanse. But trying to do that for particles is one thing. They have to be charged particles, and then trying to do that for photons which don't have a charge, I don't know. I don't have a solution. But the truth is, if we're going to be imagining a superconducting crystal that is excited via pulse protonic charge using nadions, I think we can let some things go. So, a phaser is a directed energy weapon that uses high energy photons as well as protons, neutrons, and maybe even some other reaction products in a way that is tunable. If you turn the power down, you simply stun someone. If you turn it up, you disintegrate them. I love some nerdy sci-fi language. In conclusion, phasers are not lasers. They are also not particle beams, and they are definitely not plausible. Not with anything that we understand right now, anyway. Nadions and pulsed protonic charge are Trek talk, but I love some Trek talk. But the principles that they're emulating are based on real laser science and real nuclear physics. It's the kind of sci-fi that I love. Create fictional materials and processes and then root them in real science that feels familiar to us. It's really clever science fiction. But what do you think? Did this work for you? And does my explanation make sense, or do you have an alternative idea? I know you Trek nerds have comments. Now, I know some of you are also going to have something to say about the TNG Tech Manual, but we will have no, that's not canon talk here. I love it. I don't care. It's so nerdy. The language is incredible, and the descriptions are just so fun to read through. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Abby. I'm Irish. I'm a physicist, and I like to talk about the science of sci-fi, as well as some of the big ideas in physics. Subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I also post an extra video each month on my Patreon if you're interested. Now let me know in the comments if there are any science topics in the news or sci-fi that you'd like a mini breakdown of. And if you like this video, you might like my video about why warp drive won't work, or you can check out my pop science playlist here. Stay nerdy!